like Destiny's audience is now using, even though he doubled down on this, are using it as an excuse to do whatever the hell they feel like they want to do, right? And it's like it's absolute absurdity. And how many times I've heard he's been taken out of context on this thing he doubled down on is kind of silly.
He's been taken out of context, but also we don't need context, and we also don't need any proof that what we're saying is wrong. Our personal experiences matter more. Remember?
No, I don't. I drank too much that night. I don't remember anything.
I remember losing my voice because I was yelling. I got tired of it.
Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, I think we're good to be on the same page for this conversation. Like, as in, we all know where our opinions are at and kind of where we're going.
Cool, cool.
I like it.
One hundo.
I like everybody being at least on the same page, so you don't spend like 30 minutes of the stream just getting on the same page. So we actually
Right.
have a discussion. Uh,
I
I
had
don't
to
know.
tell someone, I was like, this isn't going to be a debate. We're actually all on the same page. It's mostly a debate with the concept of reality towards some other people.
It's the
Mm.
debate where there's going to be like nuances of a discussion, right? Rather than a this person versus this person and we hate each other. Like that's not, to me, that's not even real debating. That's just like wrestling with words.
Oh, well. The English language seems to have escaped them as far as I've seen. I've had to go through things very slowly.
Sometimes you gotta break out the crayons, and sometimes that's okay. But
No,
it is
they
a
like to
problem
chew the
if they
crayons.
yeah, if they eat them too quickly.
Quickly.
Like, you're eating the crayons faster than I can write with them.
Alpha Wiggums of the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Debate Hub. I am Chesh, your master debater, and I am here with Chris and Generic Minority, and I am excited to talk about this. Yay! Actually, I am looking a little bit more forward to this conversation than I thought I was going to. At first, I was kind of dreading it, just being like, oh, we're gonna hash out the same thing. But after talking with these two lovely people in the background, I think we might actually be able to make some progress in the conversation and try to, like, frame things in a light that instead of just beating somebody down, we can actually progress the conversation and maybe get something valuable out of it. So we'll start with Chris. Do you want to tell us who you are and what you do and where to find you? And then we'll go to Generic.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Chris Shelton. I'm an author, writer, blogger, podcaster, YouTuber, and an ex-cult member. I was my big thing is I grew up in Scientology and got out like 10 years ago, escaped from that, and got so interested in the catharsis and education of recovery that I pursued a degree in psychology of coercive control, which I now have, and like to talk about psych stuff outside of just the cult paradigm, because a lot of the same principles of coercive control apply to domestic relationships and to our culture at large, not just crazy cults. So that's why I'm here today.
Well, I know you've been talking about politics a little bit more too, because that gets
Yes.
has that a lot of that same kind of mentality to it.
That's right. That's right. It's all about. I mean, I'd say really my specialty isn't cults so much as now coercive control and extremist belief, and that's way more applicable to things beyond just cultic groups.
Oh, that makes absolute sense. Generic, how about you? Who are you? Where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter or my YouTube channel, both named Generic Minority, or my Twitch, Generic Minority YT, where I stream sometimes when I feel like it. But my official background is in psychology. I have a bachelor's in psychology, so no, I'm not a doctor, unfortunately. But I specialized in child development, early adolescence. The reason why I like to speak on these things, even as I just idle chit chat in any one of my random Pokemon videos or something, is because I feel like, much like Chris mentioned, a lot of these things stem a lot deeper than just the weird surface level or super finite situations. And child development is something, the social emotional growth is something I'm very passionate about, and it gets ignored a lot, even though it gets mentioned all the time. So having a platform like this where I can talk about how those things connect is always fun. For most days, I won't say always. It's mostly fun.
That's fair. That's fair. So I feel like we should probably start on. So today we're talking about Destiny and sort of his approach to this conversation about, I guess, early relationships and whether or navigating dating, I think would probably be the best way to phrase what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Relationship stuff. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it
The battle of the sexes, the endless struggle.
right,
Yeah.
and I mean that's how it kind of feels because it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what this topic was about besides just sexual harassment and how to avoid it. Maybe.
Well, it sounds like, and I can't speak for him for sure because his clarification of it wasn't the greatest. It sounds like he was mainly talking about, like a non-relationship based sexual communication, like communicating what you want out of any individual interaction when you're, say, like at a bar or something like that, and you meet someone you're attracted to. That seems like that was the main point about it, and then that Farah was kind of expressing like her concerns about it. And then he just got derailed because he wanted to focus on not taking any kind of onus on his end of it or men's end of it. It's really nebulous. But it mostly was based around the male female interaction, and then the negatives and positives of it without ever addressing the male's negative aspects of it and how they have to take onus for them in order for them to not be a thing anymore. He just wanted them to just be, oh, there's no one to blame. It's all nebulous and it's all in the air. Or what a lot of his fan base did, and a lot, or not a lot of a small amount. I'll say a vocal minority of his fan base. And what he kind of alluded to is that a lot of the onus should be put on women, and if it's not on them, then it's essentially their fault, and that's a poor way to go about it. At least that's what I gather from it, Chris. That's I'd be more curious to know what your professional opinion on it is on.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking with what you're saying there. I definitely think you're spot on there, because he seems to lack or seems to not be willing to extend, male responsibility in the situation, and that's not good at all. I mean, to be blunt, now to call it, rape apologist, I think a little far. I mean, that was pre-show conversation.
Yeah. We talked about that in previous videos. I had asked Chad if they thought whether or not Destiny was a rape apologist, and if I remember correctly, most people seem to think that he was. And I drew a line. I don't remember if I drew it live or if I drew that line in the Discord after the fact, but at no point have I heard Destiny anywhere say that rape was okay or that what the man did was okay. He was just saying it wasn't their fault entirely at the nicest.
Yeah, really being generous. Yeah, really being generous. And I get it, right? I see what I think I see. Now this is just an hour and a half of watching the guy, right, interact with Farah. Did I get her name right?
Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting conversation, right? Watching them in the back and forth on that. That he was trying to explain this position, but he doesn't do it well. and unfortunately, a lot of what he says or the way he comes across, especially in that initial clip we saw of him that I saw, was could be very easily used to contextualize all kinds of nonsense in those situations. He doesn't allow for. He thinks men are so stupid. They're so hormone driven. They're so into their sexual desires that they have no control or responsibility. And that's not true. That's just not true. It's not ever true. So acknowledging the overwhelming physical and brain activity, even that has been studied. I mean, there's studies on this. Acknowledging that men have issues and troubles during those moments is fine. Let's talk about that. How do we deal with that?
Yeah.
But that's not what he's kind of doing. He's going, well, they have all these issues, and so therefore, it's all on the woman.
Yeah,
it's all the women, right? And it's like, no, dude, what are you talking about?
Men don't have enough self-control to be responsible in these situations. Therefore, it's on the woman to be the one who's responsible in these situations, but gives women no power or access to actually do that. The only thing we really get is avoid, like from my understanding of what he was saying. But Generic, I think you kind of mentioned that you worked with kids and education, and so You want to go ahead?
Uh, it's once again, this is something. It's something you instill in kids. My specialty is I worked in preschool mostly because I felt like going through my entire course of schooling, I worked with college kids, and I moved down to high school. Then I worked with special needs middle school, and or because I felt like it was ways to do preventative measures to prevent kids from getting to that point where they needed to be have. We need to have conversations like this where we're telling you something. You're an adult, and we have to tell you something in very slow and breakdown terms and things like that. So what you find a lot in kids is that these kind of traits exist in them very, very young, and not that they're all necessarily the end all be all worst negative thing. They're little things. It's the like not respecting personal space as a kid and getting mad when a person's another kid says don't touch me,
Well,
and things like that.
I think there's something to be said for men are kind of set up for failure in these scenarios
Yes.
because I find that most men, not all men, but a lot of men struggle with emotional maturity. They do
Mm,
not know how to express nor handle their emotions, and I think that there are large swaths of culture that degrade that and that
mm,
treat it poorly or deflect that men should ever do this. And sometimes those people are men, sometimes those people are women. When you're steeped in a culture, sometimes you don't know it's wrong. And when you're exposed to a new one, you have a hard time acknowledging or taking that on board. But if you're teaching this as children, different different places are going to have more or less of this, right? So
right.
do we do like a
Well, so this
standardized education? Do we
Well,
do?
I think it's much more important that we focus on that social emotional growth aspect of it, and I mean actually focus on it. The school I worked at was built around it, but I was also the only person who worked there who had a degree in psychology.
Oh
And more
boy.
often than not, yeah, and more often than not, I was told I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to teaching because I don't have a degree in teaching. But I go, we're preschool, we're teaching social emotional growth to 2, 3, 4 year olds. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You can handle the put a triangle in a triangle hole. That's fine. That's not what I'm here for. Especially being the only male at the time, being the only minority at the time for the first like 6 months that I was there, and then the only male for the whole first year. I feel like there is something to be said to creating the curriculums. Like you said, there is a lot of the time it gets poo pooed to address with a young boy like the concept of handling his emotions. That was something that was just like a lot of the times thrown out, even when they and bending to the will of a parent to be like, oh, it's not all my kid. Or what's the worst thing I think you could do, and a lot of parents do this is, oh, well, it takes two to tango. That mindset that oh, it's
Mm-hmm.
both of you that's in my personal opinion that's something narcissistic parents who probably were bullies or not the greatest kids say to people when they grow up because they weren't able to like compartmentalize the fact that they were the ones that were wrong. That like that apple spoils the bunch. I never taught that. It was just that one kid. We addressed it directly. I expressed to them all the reasons as to why they were wrong, had them think it, and you find a lot of the time the biggest thing is that most people assume kids don't know anything. They just assume that they can't, they'll never be able to understand. They're not old enough. They're not mature enough. Not true
So
in even the
when
slightest.
when are they supposed to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
It's you're throwing away the concept that they're ever supposed to even grow up because you have to start with the little things, the small things. And in preschool, those are the little times. Those small indiscretions are where you can start to fine tune things, and people just
Well, without it being too like drastic,
yeah.
right? What do you think, Chris?
Well, yeah.
Well, let me ask you, as an educator, as somebody who's worked in that field with children, because this is something I've talked about, but I've not done that work. Because I talk about emotional intelligence a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I originally getting out of a cult, it was all about critical thinking. It was like, oh my God, critical thinking. That was what I was missing. And, logic and reason and skepticism and how to spot
Mm-hmm.
bullshit and that kind of thing. That's what I was missing. But as I've gone through the years and learned critical thinking and talked about it and preached it, it's become abundantly clear that emotional intelligence is just as, or maybe more so, important. And by that, I mean, if you don't understand that your thinking is derived by and your behavior is mostly influenced by your emotions,
Mm,
you're not logicking your way through life. We are
no.
feeling our way through life. And then we're using the frontal lobes to kind of rationalize or justify our behavior after the fact.
Yeah.
Or before the
facts don't care
fact,
about your
because
feelings,
that's
people.
what we want to do, right? I want
Yeah.
this. There's the goal. There's the thing. Now I'm going to come up with all the reasons why that's a good thing to do. And therefore, look, I'm a logical person, right? And that, I think, has a lot to do with how and why we behave the way we do. And children have very full emotional lives. I remember being a kid. I didn't have deficient emotional, experiences. So I think teaching that, acknowledging that, developing that, knowing that those are the formative years of not just cognitive formation, but emotional formation and moral foundations establishment. I think that's crucial to understand during those times. So having said all that, what do you think about what I just said?
I agree 110%. It's the most important thing because the fact of the matter is, like we said, they are still kids. There are certain really complex concepts they're not going to get, but every kid, like you said, is driven by their emotions. They can understand how something makes them feel and how it could potentially make, if you can put a complex concept like, well, how would your brother or sister feel about this if one of their friends did that to them, right? You can put that in front of them and they can compartmentalize that. That's something very small. But if times where I've mentioned that, I'm like, well, would you like it if it happened to you, and things of that nature. They're so very simple, but gets, like I said, gets pushed to the side in exchange for whatever it is, just to say who's right or wrong.
Yeah, it does feel these are really we're taking something that feels really complicated and is very emotionally complicated and emotionally charged, like sex, like dating, like navigating those ways, and we're using the complexity of those emotions to negate the basic, like, rules of attraction, right? Like, keep your hands to yourself.
Yep.
Right? It seems like, I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Well, I think...
Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just going to respond to Alicia in the comments because I think she's kind of talking where I wanted to go with this, right? Which is they talked in the video clip I watched, or the section that I watched with Destiny, about mixed messages, and they were I was mostly harping on the whole Aziz Ansari thing, right? And they were really just going back and forth on that. And sure, mixed messages, but mixed messages start when you're 3. I mean, it's like, depending on where you grow up and where and what your parents were taught and what you're taught in school and by bullies, and they exist everywhere, and there's no getting around that. The toxic masculinity, we like to call it, right? Or this like sort of like this like, well, the boys will be boys and all that nonsense. If that doesn't get countered effectively, then you have this sort of emotional confusion that occurs, I think, through a lot of life. I sure as hell had it, growing up in the 70s and 80s, of, well, I'm supposed to be tough. I'm supposed to suck up, my emotions. I'm supposed to not be a crybaby. I'm supposed to do all these things. This is the moral foundation upon which boys are supposed to be. And bullies teach you this. Don't cry, fight back, do this, do that, right? Do all that other stuff.
Yep.
And you grow up with that, and then you're emotionally stunted because you don't have the language or even experience to understand what you're feeling, because you've been told your whole life you're not supposed to feel it.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to have somebody to talk to. And you're not supposed to be able to download. And girls are... and then you get the whole, well, what are girls? Oh, well, let me tell you about
girls. You get as a girl, you get the opposite. Anything you anytime you try to have a discussion with somebody, they're like, oh, you're just being emotional. So it's like, you get on one end of the spectrum, men are like, no, nothing you do is emotional. And on women, get the other end of the spectrum where everything you do is emotional.
Exactly. And I think...
Essentially, oh, sorry. Well, I was just saying, essentially, that's where it starts. To set them up
There's
for
a lag.
failure. Sorry.
Jared go and then Chris go.
I'm sorry, but no, you're both right though. Is that it essentially sets you up for failure because you're already framing children to be combative in their mindset just based off of their interactions with each other. Oh, girls are just being emotional. Oh, you're crying. Girls are going to cry. Oh, boys will be boys. They're going to take stuff and hit and do this and that. And even like you said, it's taught by bullies, but then it gets reinforced by parents who say things like that. It's oh, you're not supposed to cry. I have a 10-year-old brother. I never tell him he can't cry. I tell, if you're hurt, if you're feeling something, come let me know. I used to tell my students that. If you're hurt, something happened, come up and talk to me. You can always talk to me. Already opening the door of communication. Just saying, if anything's going on with you, you can come and talk to me. Is going to negate a lot of negativity around kids. Because you find a lot. I'd find a lot of time kids would like host fake conversations with me as a teacher at home, and their parents would come and tell me about it because they can't talk. They don't know how to talk to their parents. They don't know how to talk to their older brother or sister because they've all been reinforced with that. Oh, you can't cry, all that. And then they'll come to school and be like, yeah, I had, this day, this happened, and this happened, and that happened. And I'll be like, oh, man, well, what'd you do about it? And explore. And if a 3-year-old can figure that out, then I think it's perfectly reasonable that an adult should be able to do it. But the problem is, like you guys mentioned, there's those two sides that constantly. It always has to be a battle. It's always a men versus
Destiny
women.
Actually framed it that way.
Right.
He framed getting sex out of women as a fight, and it's like, I think one of the analogies he made after describing the situation from like, oh, I've wined and dined you, but I'm not having sex, and then immediately described it as I've been putting quarters in the pussy machine and sex isn't falling out. What?
I mean, I remember myself as a younger man.
Right? It's like, I understand the joke.
Where he's coming from. I do, right? It does not right, and how he's putting it is the dumbest way possible. But, there you go. Guys are problem solvers, you could say. And when when they're trying to navigate the social life of I want sex, here's a series of hurdles to get to the goal. And I think that's what he's kind of trying to express, is that guys think this way or something as a general rule. And yet, there's this inability to do a very simple thing. And I just want to cut right to the chase, I guess, since we're getting into this, which is the guy doesn't seem to understand that communication is a tool.
I think you're 100% correct on this, and I think that's what probably gets to the very, very meat of this conversation, is the absolute irony of somebody who is a debate me bro, who spends all of his time terminally online, having conversations 24/7, and being completely incapable of expressing his opinions and arguments in a cohesive way, and completely whiffing on what he's actually trying to talk about is men and women learning how to speak to each other like they're humans.
Exactly. He acknowledges the stupidity of men in the moment and generally, right? That women, we got these hormones, they go raging through our system. We get, Robin Williams has done jokes about it. Every comedian's done jokes about all the brain drains and all the blood drains from your brain and goes somewhere else, right?
Yeah,
and when you're aroused and all of that, and you're not thinking. Well, it turns out studies show that's actually true. It's not a social judgment factor. Guys do get stupider when they are aroused. It's a fact, right? But that's not an excuse.
Right.
And I think he's trying desperately to explain that without himself really even understanding what he's trying to say somehow. But and that's why I think he misses and ends up saying stuff that can be utilized. And I'm really giving this guy a serious benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, it's not like I've watched hours and hours of this guy, but I'll try to assume the best in a person before I'll assume the worst.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to go there with that. If I'm wrong about this guy and he really is like just off the rails and putting on a good show, fine. But I'm just trying to take what I heard him say and go, well, what would explain this? Well, somebody who's struggling with understanding themselves and others and stupid ass behavior that guys get up to. And then you add alcohol and drugs into the mix and it gets even 10 times stupider. And an inability to think, hey, maybe in the moment if you just said, hey, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
How do you want to go? How about we talk about this a little bit?
Yeah.
Somehow that's an impossible dream for him.
I think there's a question that Generic wants to touch on, but just quickly before that, it's if Destiny wanted to do like a comedy stream or make like if he wasn't trying to pretend he was having like lucid conversations about the way society is and try to project himself that way, I think that people would have way less of a fucking problem. But there's also something to be said about when you're trying to have these kinds of conversations, treating the other people and the audience with respect is a good start. And to expect people to watch hours and hours and hours and hours of content about a person to make an assessment about their position on a singular subject is not reasonable or fair to expect. But generic, you let me pull up the question because I want to throw it out here. Whoops, hold on. I'm just gonna throw it on screen. And the question was from Feline that says, "Why must sex be the goal in the first place? It seems that's all Destiny had on his mind for the discussion."
No, I was actually about to say, even just bring that up, is that that's also a big mistake too. Is that we teach them kids that that end result is a thing. Even just something as simple as that sex is always the end result. Something as simple as the fictitious milestones we throw on the kids of like, when you get this age, you have to have kids and you have to be married, and even the where we place a kid's mind on their goals in life and what they need to do is automatically from the bottom starts in the wrong place. So when you're taught, as a young man, it's like, here's the hurdles you have to jump over in order to not even let's just take the carnal like sex out of it, just to get a woman in general. I think you're still also, when you start in the beginning, you're missing one thing, and it's hilarious to me all the time how you say women are emotional and they like to talk, but you never teach boys how to talk or deal with their emotions. It's like, well, you can't say that, oh, it's like this. Only one side has to always get taught everything. So that's always where the balance is. Like you said, the respect for your audience and the fact that you have to essentially, like, I don't know how to say it, you like only one side ever has to learn anything. Boys are always just treated as they don't have to learn anything.
That's an analogy he made, right? One of the analogies that I think I heard Destiny making was men are responsible for pushing the gas and women need to be responsible for pushing the brake. And so I was like, great, so what happens when you press both at the same time? Not only does that not make any sense, because women should be allowed to push forward if they want to, and men should also be allowed to say no and pump the brakes. So when you remove one aspect of control, like of your autonomy, and put it entirely in the hands of people you don't know, especially in hookup culture, right? You don't know the person you're going to hook up with very well, right? That's the point. And so if you don't know the person and you have to give up that entire part of your autonomy to that other person, whether it be the gas or the brake, to me is absurd in the first place.
Well, and then on top of that, even bigger, sorry, Chris, is that like he says like men push the gas, women push the brakes. That does not account for who's driving, who's holding the steering wheel, which would start as the parenting, who is fixing the engine, who's changing the oil,
what's the destination of the car?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the car going? Are we driving on the right side of the road? It's much more complex than these one end. It's just this, it's just that. Life is a lot more. I don't know if people know this, but I've heard that there are many shades of gray, 50 of them even. And so you can't just throw everything into, all men need to do this, all women need to do that, and this is just how it works. And you'll never, like I said earlier, it's always combative. It's never a communication. It's never a sharing experience of like, okay, so let's talk about what we want, where it goes, where we're going. And even in a hookup situation, you're saying like, this is what I'm looking for. Yeah, sure. Do men often do that? Do women often do that? No, but that's because we're taught not to communicate those things. If you're going out on a date, or if you're going when I go out on a Tinder date, I express exactly what I'm looking. Hey, just me and you, see how things feel. Let me know what you think.
Okay. When it comes to Tinder dating, and I have a question for we'll let Chris go and then generic after this question. Sure. If just to help you guys from not clashing at the same time, that's just lag. It's just the program. Okay, if you're talking about dating and hookup culture, am I way off base in that men are so concerned about rejection and are so afraid of rejection that they're not willing to be upfront with what they're looking for because they get shot down, maybe because they get shot down too often, or like due to their approach, like for whatever reason, justified or not?
I'll say yes. As a general rule, I'd say yes. Certainly my experience. You don't want to hear the no. Because that's the hard line. And once you've heard it, you can't go back. So you want to do that sales job, right? The salesman doesn't want to hear no. It's a sales thing. I mean, that's how I was taught, and that's how I grew up. That's how you're kind of approaching this. It's You know, we're going to do this and we're going to try this and we're going to try. Oh, and if it looks like there's some sales resistance, well, let's back off and come back around over this way. And as long as you don't get the hard no, so you're saying there's still a chance, right? You know, it's that kind of attitude. And not great, not wonderful, not at all the way it should be going.
Not productive.
But when you're taught, again, like we were talking about before, when you're taught that your emotions don't really matter, that you need to suck it the fuck up, that, shut up and just like be the man and also the whole other aspect of that, which I didn't mention out loud earlier, was men are supposed to take charge. Men are supposed to be leaders. Men are supposed to be the guys who run things. Men are supposed to be all these stereotypes, all the stereotypes, right? So then you have a guy coming into this situation going, well, I'm expected to lead this situation and you're expected to follow as the woman.
That's the gas and the brake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And instead of looking at it as a push, pull on both ends, and we're kind of figuring out where
both people are supposed to participate.
Yeah, right. Again, that's
as equals.
Yeah. Oh my God, we can't have any of that. Because you're carefully taught that this is what you're supposed to be. And then the real world hits you in the face and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't how I was taught it was supposed to be. And then there's that cognitive dissonance. It's actually a confusion. It's noise in your head and it's fucking confusing. And in the moment when the hormones are raging and the executive functions are lowered,
it's too late.
If we go there.
Yeah.
Then it's 20 times more difficult. It's not impossible. None of this is an excuse for going too far, but it's a struggle. And it seems that there's a set of people who don't want to even acknowledge that struggle exists. No, you're just evil. You're just stupid. You're just bad. No, it's a struggle. Yeah. And maybe we could talk about that and ways and strategies of dealing with that by communicating more. Dumbass, simple, stupid solution, but it really is the only way to sort this stuff out.
What do you think, Generic?
I mean, they teach you that in psychology, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It's not particularly hard. But I agree. It's teaching kids off the bat, teaching people in general that it's a battle or that there's these set check markers you need to get to in order to be, because to piggyback off what Chris said, it's like you also set those check markers and you're a social pariah if you don't meet them. Like if you get the hard no, then you get treated like you're not as good as some other guy. It's like, oh, well, you got the yes.
Men and then also no incredibly personally. The no. Personally.
I will point to, since a lot of the opposing base who go against us always talk about their experiences. I can talk to personally. I used to be about 400 pounds, 409 in my top. And I remember one day in college, I asked a girl out and I was just like, hey, do you want to go out sometime? And she said yes. And I was like, all right, I'll get your number, that. And I was walking away with a friend of mine who's also a big guy. And he's like, you just asked her out. And I was like, yeah, well, what? She can say no. She didn't say no, so she said yes. And he's like, what if she had said no? She would have said no. And I would have just continued to go to class because there's more to life than just trying to get this girl's number and get with her. Like, there are other girls out there. I don't know if you know, there are kind of billions of people on the planet. There's not like there's only just the one girl. That's another thing, too, of this like dog-eat-dog mindset of like, if I don't get this girl I want, then I'm never going to get another girl ever. And it's like, oh, that's not how that works. Also, statistically, there's probably 12.5 girls in your immediate area who are compatible with you. So why not just take the no, learn, and move forward? It's just I see you making a face and people that
no, I think you're right, and I just wanted to make sure that you got to finish your thought first, because I think that there's this idea about putting women on a pedestal, and I think that there's this misnomer that women want to be treated that way. They want to be treated like they're special and that you're the only one that matters to them, but that comes later in the relationship, not right away. It's not at 24/7. It's weird if you're coming on to somebody that strong, like, I don't know who you are, and suddenly I'm the only person in the world for you. This is some rom-com bullshit. Nobody likes that.
Well, and yet, what are they raised on?
Rom-coms and Disney. Do you have any idea how much I've heard about people complaining that Disney and movies like it cause so many like just misnomer understandings about relationships, and like, if I do this, I get this girl as a prize at the end, so if I get rejected, it means I did something wrong, and then therefore I just need to try again and do it the right way this time. And it's like, that is not the lesson. That is not the lesson.
But it is the lesson men are taught.
Yes.
And it happens to kind of be in us, again, kind of I'll go back to the biology of it, because I think it's important.
For sure.
Again, not a justification for bad behavior, just an explanation of why the behavior exists, is the aggressive kind of forward thinking, problem solving, and guys get turned on, or they get like in the possibility or the zone of going in that direction, and they do get aggressive. They do the chase. That's kind of their thing, and it's not, it's not that hard to understand. Mm-hmm. But guys what they're not educated in and don't get through communication or education or otherwise is how polar opposite women are. It's kind of like they expect women to immediately be like they are, and women kind of expect men to be like they are, and it's this weird miss that happens.
Yeah, it
often,
seems to be
with younger people. It grows with maturity. You kind of, you go around the block a few times and you start realizing, oh, yeah, we're really different, and then you can tailor your approach very, very differently. But young guys are just so eager beaver to get in there that they just they don't acknowledge their.
Yeah. See, listen, we can make sex jokes here about pussy and shit. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, as you said, you're putting quarters in the machine, right? And that really is a thinking modality that guys get into at that stage, and I think education can overcome that. I think it can, but it's cultural too. There's social pressures here we should also talk about, because you mentioned that bro culture, and Destiny's kind of in that world, and he's also kind of a Jordan Peterson acolyte, isn't he?
I don't think he actually is. I think because in the video that you had watched, which was the Farah and him debating about what Jordan Peterson were saying, his takes kind of were just like, what the fuck, where he was trying to justify some of Jordan Peterson stuff. Now, me and Manya had watched this particular video and chunks of this video on Dumbfuck Friday as well, so I thought that was kind of funny and appropriate. But this idea of hierarchy that Jordan Peterson puts forward, and Destiny agreeing with that hierarchy, I don't know if he's followed down the logical conclusion about what that means. And Feline brought up a good point that says one major difference is historically. Is that women have been able to make their choices only for more or less in the last century. So if you're stuck in this loop and this expectation of society, and you have a good number of people who are supposedly people with credentials like Jordan Peterson, credentials, I use this term loosely, that he's trying to keep things in that space, or at least slow their progress as much as possible, you end up with like society fighting against itself. Right? So women being in a position to be, and then also trying to then have your cake and eat it too by removing and deflecting men and their behaviors and responsibilities as individuals, and then saying, but there's nothing women can do about it. So I don't think he's like a Jordan Peterson acolyte. I think this is just a topic that he happens to, for the most part, agree with him. Just okay, fair enough. I don't know if it applies like to some of the other crazy stuff that Jordan Peterson.
Well, it's always a bit of a mixed bag with that guy. So and I find it seems to me in the passing, sort of familiarity I have with that world and with that guy, it seems that a lot of young men struggle to actually understand what the guy's actually saying in the first place, and like radically misunderstand some of what he says. And
I think that's by
all
design.
too well understand some other parts about what he says, which are really awful stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a mixed bag there. So I couldn't quite tell where he was coming from with talking about Peterson. Fair enough.
I think that the biggest thing is just that no matter because I saw someone in the chat say like, are we against Destiny? Or nobody is against it. This isn't against Destiny. That's another big thing too, is this parasocial relationship people have with YouTube personalities in general, or internet personalities
of discussion.
If you don't like an opinion that this person had on the internet, regardless of any of the context around it, even though they scream about it all the time, is that we're not against him as a person. I don't know anything about Destiny as a person. He could have and people keep pointing, oh, you got to watch his other stuff. He could have 100,000 hours of him saying the polar opposite, or saying something similar to what we're saying, but in the context of what we watched and what his follow up to it and his response to it is that
and
there's
his
clearly
followers' response to it.
And a lot of his followers' response, who've been here in the chat a couple times and been on the show at one point, it's like clearly there is a disconnect between what you believe to be appropriate interactions with, one, human beings in general, because they're really bad at having those, but two, men and women. It's that it's not as you're combative about whether or not someone does or doesn't like Destiny based off the fact that he said something, even if he was misspoke or whatever. Oh, well, you don't like Destiny and you need to watch him more. It's like, that's not going to make me like him more. In fact, as we've noticed, we've gained more and more context to the things he's saying, and he just gets progressively worse. If anything, you're making me like him less, because every time I hear it, me personally, I've never heard of him a day in my life, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't want to watch other YouTubers who I know who watch him, because I'm like, so you ignored all this in the meantime? Because I go back and I look and it's like, this is the first time he said something kind of out there and just gone, oh, well, I'm just having a discussion. Okay, if you're having a discussion, you need to present an argument and both sides of it, and proof and facts, and not just ones that support your side of it. There's just a big realm.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very irresponsible, and his, especially, the one thing that really gets me, regardless of anything else, is his, well, I can't control that part of my fan base who decide to take the things I say and weaponize them and radicalize them. It's like, man, that kind of reminds me of like the Osho cult that took over that town in Oregon and tried to poison the water supply with salmonella. And they did that whole documentary. If you get the chance to watch it, it's called Wild Wild Country. Where it's like, oh, well, I'm preaching peace and da-da-da. It's just these people who decided to take over this town and try to poison the water supply so we could win an election. But it's like, well, where'd they come from? They came from you. It starts there. It's like, it's same as when you have a bad kid. It started at home. If a kid comes to my class and he's bad, it's like, well, what do your parents teach you at home? And then you hear about what they get taught at home, and you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense as to why you're like that. You know, so you can't feel as though you have the moral, the authority to pontificate to people and like, oh, I have this many. He's mentioned that I have this many fans and all that. Okay. So if you have this many fans, you sit at this level. Why do you not treat it like that? Instead, just choosing to say whatever you feel like you want to say in the moment. And then if people take it out of a sense of going to go attack others, you ignore it until it looks bad on you. Because that was the big thing too. That's another thing about Destiny is, the way Farrah took this made me look bad. It's like, why are you so concerned about it making you look bad? What about, did you ask her like about the people that were going in their chat and attacking her? Because I guarantee that happened. It happened here. And this is a much smaller platform. Yeah, and it's a much smaller situation. It's like, I can only imagine what these guys did to this young lady if they came to Chesh to yell at, and Chesh was super nice about it. They came to yell at Chesh and just talk about like, you don't know anything because you're a woman. Like, it's like, did you take onus for them?
Yeah, there's a have your cake and eat it too, right? He wants to be able to have his fans and have his platform and have his fans do the dirty work for him, but then also wants to disassociate himself from any culpability or responsibility for fostering that environment in the first place, right? And that's going to be a struggle back and forth, because there is sometimes only so much you can do, right? Sometimes there are going to be people that are going to take what you say, they're going to take it out of context, or they're going to try and twist it and utilize it in whatever way they want to use it. And that's going to happen. But to say that because that's happened and is guaranteed to happen, that you have no responsibility to try to control it as best as you can is, I think, dishonest, in my opinion. But go ahead. You go ahead.
I take this very seriously as a content creator or as a person out there who people listen to. There's a responsibility that comes with that. And, we don't have to go full, Marvel Spider-Man here. With great power comes great responsibility. But kinda. I mean, kind of. If you're really being like honest about it, it does. And if you don't take the time as a creator and as a person who has a platform where people are listening and you know they're listening, and he's acknowledged that that's the case, he's got a far bigger audience than I do. And I take great pains over and over and over again when I expose cultic abuses, and I expose a lot of them across the whole spectrum of activities, not just Scientology, but all over the place. I take great pains to constantly reinforce that I am not okay with and have never endorsed violence towards these groups, any kind of retribution activity, any kind of vengeance activity. Absolutely not. Don't do it. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm saying out loud to you, that's not okay. It's not what this is about.
And I will take this moment to say, definitely do not go to cameo.com/ksorbs and get Kevin Sorbo to read his own tweets out loud. Do not do that. I'm telling you not to do that thing. Don't do it. There's something to be said as well if you want to start talking about like parasocial relationships and responsibilities as a creator. Like, I'm tiny. I'm smaller than Chris as well. I'm much, much smaller than Destiny. I'm nowhere near Farah's numbers. I have nowhere near any of these things. I go out of my way to still be responsible for what I say and what I do, and try to double check to make sure the things that I say are correct in the first place, and then go out of my way to correct things if I get something wrong. And this seems like but especially for somebody who's, again, terminally online 24/7, you have plenty of opportunity to correct yourself, right? You have plenty of opportunity, and it might feel exhausting as a creator, and I can acknowledge that. If you get the same criticism over and over and over again from 100 people, it's going to feel like you're getting way more attacked than you actually are, or it's going to feel like you're being harassed when you're actually not. What you're getting is backlash. And it might feel like you're answering the same question over and over and over again, or you might feel like you've apologized for this thing already 4 or 5 or 6 times, but what you have is a large audience, so you're going to have to address it, unfortunately, a good number of times, or at least address it in a way that it's so clear that you can then point people to that addressing of it when it comes up, so you don't necessarily have to... Like, there are ways to handle it, is what I'm getting at. But when it comes to parasocial stuff...
Well, it seems that there is another impulse that takes over creators. I've seen this. Like, we all see this, right? We've seen this forever. And it's far from even a YouTube phenomenon. We see this in television, radio. I mean, it goes all the way back to anybody who's ever had a platform, which is where they realize the power that comes with that, and that there is more interest generated and more attention given when you are controversial. When you're purposefully riling up the emotional base. There's gold in them Nar Hills, right? And it's so easy to prey on people that way and sort of fall into it, because people are there's a couple of comments where people have noted that Destiny used to be somebody who would go out of his way or would note this or talk about this or talk about, creator responsibility. And yet, from what I saw on his YouTube page and from the last, months of content from him, it's very, very rile up, controversial. Let's get into this and have a fight,
rather than a conversation. Just like the let's have sex rather than a conversation. I'm just gonna ignore the thing you're saying, and then whoops, my dick accidentally fell into you. My bad. Whoops. That's something. Yeah, that's something that I want to discuss. But before that, I do want to point something else for people who are fans of Destiny, that are the fans that are, well, you just don't understand what he's saying, or you this, or you're gonna fight Destiny's battles for him. You don't know him either. All you see is the curated content. That's all you see. You only know so much about the dude. Do you talk to him back and forth? Or do you know him? Have you met him? Do you have any kind of personal relationship with him? No. So, all you can do is take whatever he's choosing to put out. And the one time we get something that he didn't curate, it's a whole lot of nonsense. Huh. Funny. Awfully convenient.
Maybe this is just something I'm used to seeing. I hang out in other discords of people who talk about like the lolcow culture. A lot
Oh
of those
yeah.
videos get done by smaller streamers. They get chopped up of whatever person streaming. They get chopped up and then put into packages where they make fun of them and so on and so forth. But like there's a couple of them, a lot of them, who are like very big transphobes who like just don't like trans people, don't like gay people, and they cut all those parts out. And then the parts that when I'm in some other podcast or watching something else, those are the only parts you see. And then you watch the full stream and you're like, this dude is like a psycho nut who thinks some of the worst things on the face of the planet, because you get, like you said, you get the sterilized version of it. And the one time it's not in his control to fix it. And let me be 100% honest with you, when it comes to the Farrah stuff, I feel like he had a lot of pull and say into what she made, and that's why she doesn't have the full thing. 'Cause I find it very odd. I don't posit her as someone who wouldn't keep all of that. Like, even as small of a channel as I am, I keep the entirety of my like 2 hour to
It was
3
kind of
5 hour long
weird.
recordings.
Yeah.
Like I have 5 hour long recordings of things that I've made, and I keep them just in case something happens. I need to re-upload it, need to re-edit it, or something like that. And the fact that she doesn't kind of screams to me that he was like, "Oh, this part makes me look bad," and didn't think the rest would. And then when it did, he was like, "Oh, you did it. What you did, you didn't follow my instructions, and that's why I look bad." Like,
I mean, he straight up lied about his interaction with her about the handling of that footage. In one stream, he said that it was just a bad cut by her, and he didn't know anything about it, and da 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 da. And then the next stream, she explains to him to his face, which he's nodding along and agreeing with, saying, "Oh yeah, that happened." They had full-on conversations where she was re-editing it and re-uploading it and asking him if he wanted to see it, and he refused. That's not her just cobbling it together and then sending it off. That's her saying, "Hey, do you want this or that or the other thing?" So he completely misrepresented the situation to his fans, and they just don't seem to care. But back to like the argumentation, and enough about Destiny the individual, because I really don't think that's that important. It is to in a different aspect though. Is this whole idea of you go to a bar, you meet up with a girl, you're in this hookup culture because they want to focus on that for whatever reason, and so it's reasonable to go and expect sex when you've met somebody, right? How do you go from talking to somebody for the first time to now I've raped them due to mixed signals? Like, there seems to be a couple of like steps in between here that are like, you're not just going from immediately one to the other. And Chris, do you want to go first? Then we'll let Generic go.
Sure. Great question or great point. But if I could just address something, Generic, you commented in the comments there about it as well. There's this kind of accusation about a argumentum ad populum fallacy.
Yes.
I don't think that's what we were trying to do. If that's in regards to the point about creators should be responsible for their words. We were talking, I mean, it matters more when you have a large audience, but that's not that fallacy in play. It has to do with influence.
No,
so
I think
it matters if you have 2 viewers.
Yeah,
so
I think Feline is saying that it's not reasonable for Destiny to use his numbers as a way to bolster his arguments when he wants to have his cake and eat it too. Right?
Oh, got it. That was on that part. Okay, so I was trying to figure out what they were talking about there. Okay,
Feline was catching up.
Yeah. I think Feline has fallen behind because of a buffering issue, I guess, somewhere. But I think that's what they were going for. They can also correct us in the chat if we're misunderstanding them.
Just wanted to make sure that was because As far as your point there, I mean, I don't know how.
And communication. The fuck is that?
Yeah, I really don't know how else to put it. Open your damn mouth and talk. I mean, again, see, I was talking earlier about those cultural and educational influences and the the sort of the toxicity that guys can get their eyes on. There is this idea that you don't want that hard no, and so anything goes as long as you don't get it. And that's not right, obviously.
And you need the literal no, and it needs to be only the word no. If it's anything besides directly only the word no, and then sometimes even that's not good enough. In the clips that we looked at and the videos we watched with Destiny, he was presented with this saying like, okay, but I told no, I'm not interested, and he had responded with, well, now you put the idea in his head. As if it wasn't there before.
Well, yeah, exactly. And saying I'm not interested is a different thing from, well, let's slow down, from, well, hold on, to, I mean, there's gradations of this, right? Use your
Yeah.
words, and use the right words. And if you do mean no, is it really that, say no.
Well, if she says no and says so in a way that you're not sure about, is it then not reasonable to, at the very least, back off and then reconfirm, or just say, "Hey, are you saying this?" Like, you can have a back and forth. Like, you don't look. And his argument, and one thing that he said in a whole other video, which I don't think I sent to you guys. There's a whole other video that I was watching just to, like, because I wanted to see where he was going, like, on other channels to address this, because he's doing the
Yeah.
whole fucking circuit, right? And so I went and saw, and he made this blatant statement about the reason why men don't call out other men is because they don't, like, when those other men know for a fact that their friend sexually assaulted their female friend in that group, and the men don't say or do anything about it because those men don't want to feel or look like cucks. And I'm like, how could you be any more of a pussy than not calling out or somebody who assaulted your friend because you're worried about how you're gonna look to that person?
Well,
Yeah,
I'll tell you, I mean, social pressures are strong, but that, it's stuff like that that's going to earn you the label rape apologist. I mean, I'm sorry, but Jesus Christ, man, I mean, come on. That's not, because it can very easily be taken that you're bending over backwards to justify inaction or even tacit agreement with sexual assault, and that's never acceptable, ever. Yep. So that doesn't make sense. That just whatever those words were, that's ridiculous.
I think. Well, I think even to a bigger point to that is, like, one, why is it still? This is one thing we've mentioned even outside of the Destiny thing. Why is it that if these are all things we know, if you say to a man, if you did something, assault a woman, then you're a cuck, and if men can't figure it out, why is the conversation never what men need to be doing to not be that kind of way? It's always like, women need to have knives, and they need to know judo, and they need to get Krav Maga and have a gun. And it's like, okay, at what point do you just want it to be like Tank Wars, where there's just an army of Amazonian women who keep men as slaves? Is that what you want? Do you want the Wicker Man world where we're burning men at the stake because you have no control whatsoever? Because if you want, there's a couple islands you can, if you want, there's a couple islands you can go to make sure they sacrifice you so that the apples will come back or the bees will come back. Like, there is that greater point of, like, why are we not, like Chris said, teaching the communication, the understanding of another big thing that I see get ignored a lot is that because Destiny mentioned it, he was like, oh, no, sometimes that like the miscommunication. It's like, well, there's also other ways to communicate other than just telling someone no. There's body language, there's facial expressions, there's cadence in how you say words.
His response to any of that was the woman should just stay home.
Yeah, well, that's another thing that a lot of his fan base mentioned that too. They were like, well, you don't think that there should be more that women are doing? One, we're assuming women don't already do that. They don't already teach each other that. I come from a family of women. They do. Trust me. There is about 30 women on one half of my family, only 3 men. Okay? Trust me, they do. And two, and I'm a lot of the time, I'm the one that's like, yeah, watch your sisters because this, that, fiddle, and fat. Like, you've never been from the side of being the only man in a situation where there are a ton of women and you're being told you got to protect them because other people don't care about whatever the things. What I taught, I just so happen to be lucky to come from a family that taught me those things. But, like, I also had to be, like, damn near stand like a human shield to defend them because they're like, other men don't get taught that. And even that line, like, why are we not teaching them that? That was one of the things that made me want to get into psychology, why I'm so passionate about teaching. Why are we not teaching other boys to not touch my sisters? I shouldn't have to get into a fist fight with boys at school for touching my sister. They should just not be doing it because I know that. If
he pulls your hair and does something you don't like, it means he likes you.
Yeah. Boys, please just learn how to talk to girls. It's not hard.
Yeah, I think well, and again, there is that aggression stuff and various things there, but I think you do have to overcome that with education. You have to overcome these natural impulses and ideas that boys get up to. And it can be overcome. I mean, obviously.
I think most men actually do, as opposed to what.
Yeah,
Destiny
certainly after they get out of grade school.
Right.
Yeah, and I think where my main problem with this dude and his messaging, and I think I said this after the first time I watched like 2 minutes of him, was his inability to acknowledge the male side of responsibility in this issue, in this equation. He just dumps it. Oh no, just guys are just not responsible at all, and the entire onus is on the woman. And if she doesn't want that outcome, she shouldn't have shown up in the first place. That is the most dumbass logic I've ever heard in my life, and I can't even begin to go there. That's not how human beings work and how relationships work at all.
Yeah.
So it's just a straight up, this just like horribly fallacious thinking on his part.
How do you guys? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's the thought. That's the part where I kind of get a little frustrated with this dude. Is like, what are you talking about? You're both there. You're both in the moment. You both are responsible.
There's something about that Damage just said that I wanted to point out. He says, love the show, hating the hate. Some man just can't get the love, so they take whatever they can steal. Trust me, I've been in more ladies than I will ever deserve. The ideology and the approach, the premise of this is so sad to me. Because having sex with a woman doesn't make you a better person nor accomplished in it doesn't mean anything. It's nice.
Yeah.
And this is something that Destiny came close to approaching. He said not all men have access to being able to have sex with hundreds of women. In fact, I would go further and say most men don't have access to hundreds of women that you could have sex with. That's just an idea you brought up in your own brain. That's not real. And so, it's not about hating on men, and it's not about just because you think that having sex with a woman brings you value. That's not on women, nor is that on men. That's something that's either been decided culturally, which I don't think most people would agree with.
No. Intrigued Feline brings up this point. Education in America, how are you going to see that happen? Even just basic education is apparently quite difficult there, and you want them to teach social ethics? Yeah. I want parents to. I want social groups to. I want the Boy Scouts to. I want. This isn't something you sit in the classroom. That's not the only place where learning occurs.
That's true.
And we are experiencing cultural changes right now that are teaching us new values. That's what all of the civil rights movement for the last 150 years has been about. It's a generational change. It's not something that just, here's your textbook on social interaction and ethics. Knock yourself out. It's that you're never going to teach it that way. You've got to, it's a cultural as well as social, as well as in the school, but in the classroom kind of thing. If that's not been clear, or, obviously maybe it's not been said out loud. So let me say that out loud. We're not just talking about something that a teacher is going to teach a kid in a classroom.
I think that there's something to be said, though, as well, that if it were me, and I think I've probably said this on streams before, I would revamp the entire fucking educational system, and psychology and communication would be core aspects. And Generic, what you were talking about with what you actually did, part of what you were doing was exactly that type of education.
And in a lot of cases, it was poo-pooed in exchange for teaching a kid that 2 + 2 = 4, because they're going to be starting school soon and they needed to learn that. And I go, well, they're also going to be interacting with other humans, and they need to learn how to do that as well. There's too much emphasis put on kids hearing things and then regurgitating it back on a piece of paper over them being able to communicate with one another. Because even outside of that, one of the biggest things that is a pitfall of kids, and it's something that's happened in the kids that I know, the ability to communicate that they don't understand something and therefore get help in a classroom. sure, you could, if you separate the two, the fact that children aren't taught how to communicate what they're feeling in any given scenario, regardless of if it has to do with men or women, is a big pitfall in schooling in general. So many kids who I know who can't just come up and say, oh, I'm confused by this thing. Can you help me with it? Because there's still that social pariah of being like, oh, how don't you know it? I taught it to you and da 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 da. I didn't care that a kid could tell me what triangle went into a triangle. If they came and asked me, I didn't care to tell them that the triangle goes in the triangle hole. I was much more interested in them being inquisitive about the concept of learning and being exploratory in the learning, to be able to feel comfortable to come and ask me a question if they were confused. And once again, that communication, that social emotional growth, the ability to converse with it. If a friend knew something more, they would go up and ask another friend and things like that. So it's something that I can speak personally that I got poo-pooed all the time. And I spent 2.5 years working at that school. It never put me down once. I still did it anyway.
Yeah,
you know,
learning
it's still on
is
us
a
to
collaborative effort. And so to try to isolate people into numbers or test results is not a good way to approach education overall, whether you use a school setting or whether you use a social setting, because that's one of the other things that I think that our society is very much not good at, is giving adults space to learn. Right? We're very, very contentious with each other. We're very, very not forgiving to each other. And the thing is how is anybody going to learn anything in that kind of an environment? How is anybody ever going to be better? And there are some things that deserve to be just like stomped on and like, you don't know, fuck off. No, fuck off. Yeah. Fuck you. Fuck everything that's going on. I don't give a shit about whether you just don't know this or you're just asking questions. I don't give a fuck. Go learn it by Googling it. You don't need all of society to tell you. But, like, this is why we're not sitting here saying Destiny needs to be canceled. We're not sitting here saying Destiny's a bad person. We're saying being charitable about his approach and what he might be trying to say, and then elaborating on what that is and how to improve that and improve the conversation in the future is what we're trying to do, and kind of the conversation we are actually having.
Absolutely. And it's really kind of a fill in the blank kind of thing, because I get where the dude, I mean, I think I get where he's coming from. I think I get what he's trying to do. And I don't see him as some evil goblin who needs to be destroyed. It's like, no, I think if he had a little bit more understanding of the things that he was talking about, a little bit more empathy, perhaps, for the other side of the equation, a little bit more like maturity in addressing how this might actually be resolved in a practical way, not a it's all on you kind of way, right? Like, own it a little bit better.
It's not about blame, it's about solutions. Yeah,
basically. And about owning our part of it as males, I guess you could say, right? Or as this side, if you're going to speak for or talk about as a spokesperson for, well, this is guys and this is what guys are and this is what guys are capable of, and that's very much the platform he's on.
Yeah.
Then don't just represent all men as the lowest common denominator and say, well, you know, the lowest of the low are not understanding, non-empathetic, just in it for themselves, egotistically looking for sex because they're predatory. And that's just guys. And there's just nothing you can do about it. And that is why my problem with his messaging. Am I missing anything in that?
No, I agree. I think one of the biggest things is we've all been very charitable in the concept of like, well, this is all thinking, this is what he could mean. This is what maybe he might have just said it in the wrong way. But every time he's been given the opportunity to pivot, adjust, and all that, and a lot of his fan base, the way they take it is like all very personal and all very like, oh, well, you said this, so you're like, oh, you don't like this thing he said, so you don't like him. It's like, no. Like you said, there's the maturity
aspect.
It's
not about him. It's not about whether or not
exactly.
he's a good or a bad person. Maybe he is awful, but that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're here to do.
Right.
If he needs to be canceled, that's not the discussion we're having. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but I agree. The discussion we're having is that ideology that he was just speaking on. Maybe it was in passing, but that ideology he's speaking on or touched on is what needs to be canceled because it's not productive to anything. Just assuming the worst out of anyone. Let's take the gender aspect out of it completely. Assuming the worst of like that'd be like assuming all women are manipulative liars who just want to take my money if I marry them. Like I don't think that. Like you can't think like that. And to Chris's point earlier, I that's where I bump heads with it because it's so horribly pessimistic. Why do we want to be so negative, so bad in our human interactions that we can't express like, hey, you know what? There are these bad people out here that have done these wrong things, but we need to grow, mature, and learn from their mistakes. A smart man learns from his mistake. A wise man learns from the smart man's mistakes. Like we're not doing any of that part. We're skipping all that. We're just focusing on the negative end of it. And here, at least I think, we try not to. Unfortunately, it kind of gets bogged down because so much of it is him and his audience. Yeah, there's the levels to it are all every time we dig lower, it's all negativity that's surrounding it. So you kind of get stuck in it. So just speaking positively, is that it's not about an individual, regardless of who the content creator would be. Even if it were to say me, I'm a nobody. If I just had something on the internet, got clipped somewhere, and wound up on TikTok that I was like some kind of weirdo, it's like, well, yeah, but the ideology is dumb. So let's move past that, and then maybe just don't watch that guy and move on. But it's unfortunately it's that the parasocial bond with content creators and this, and we were in your Twitch the other day about someone who thinks that a YouTube person is a celebrity and then found out like they're not. They're just a person who happens to have a pretty big platform, but
a person with a platform in a niche market does not a celebrity make.
Yeah, Markiplier showing up to the Emmys and getting looked at by like Tom Hanks, like who the hell are you? Yeah, that's common. That happens a lot actually. They don't care. Like YouTube movies are not most of the time not good. I personally I don't care about Markiplier in space. Like I watch actual movies. Like I guarantee if I told hey
he's working on an actual movie right now. Interestingly enough.
More power to him. I hope he gets to have an awkward conversation with Kristen Stewart at some point at the Oscars. But as of now, if I walked up to him and I walked up to Kristen Stewart or anybody and was like, hey, you know who Markiplier is? They'd be like, I was on a yacht the other day. Could you get out of my face? Like this.
Bro,
this
you cannot pretend that Markiplier is a standard celebrity. He is niche in the gaming market and niche on YouTube. And YouTube is not treated like mainstream media.
No, as much as they try to, as much as Marvel can make a YouTube channel so they can sneak off clicks on the 20 million sub button, doesn't mean that makes them YouTube celebs, or YouTubers actual celebrities. So one thing, it's another big pitfall of this entire argument is the internet culture in and of itself. Is this what it was prior to in between 2009 when YouTube started until essentially till 2016, it was a place where people who had kind of niche things that they liked interest could communicate with each other. The people who left from Newgrounds like Ego Raptor and Harry Partridge and all the artists who switched over and came to YouTube and their animations got really popular. And it's like, well, if I were to talk to someone who is doesn't watch animations, they're not gonna know who Ego Raptor is. I didn't know who the hell JonTron was when Game Grumps started. I was like, who the fuck is this weird dude? Like, it's like that's another thing too. It's like this belief that these people are on such a high pedestal is insane, and therefore absolved of criticism in any kind of way is another big problem. So like I said earlier, it's so many layers and it's hard to break them down without becoming caught in the negative. It's a wash. It's a wave of negativity.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I, for one, want to see Markiplier have an awkward conversation with Kristen Stewart, but whatever, that's just my thing. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Well, there was
the hell out of that. I'd pay to watch that.
There was a question earlier from somebody for us about whether we think that Destiny is a red pillar.
Oh, yeah.
He claims to be, I believe.
I wouldn't put him that way, but he claims to be. That's interesting. You think society... And now the definition I could find on slang here is one who believes that society is gynocentric.
Yeah.
Or thinks women have all the power.
Yeah, it's the incel ideology that women control all the sex, and because they control all the sex, it means they get to pick and choose who gets to have kids, and in doing so, it means it's kind of conspiracy-ish, I would put it.
Right. Yeah, I did some video about red pillars a couple of years ago, and that whole phenomenon and the men's rights movement. That's what it was. I was talking about the men's rights movement. And the pros and cons. Yeah, that there are some legitimate points being made, but then of course, knowing extremism the way that I know it, it goes way too far, way too fast with certain people who have grievances that they just take to the nth degree. And then it's all women's fault. And again, there's this lack of balance of like, oh, it's a push-pull thing, and society is no different. So
and it's historically so
identifies
far, yeah, it's so ingrained into our culture, and it's so historically been one way for so long. I think it is, although it's not an excuse and it shouldn't be accepted, it's reasonable to say that people are gonna get it fucking wrong. And people are gonna get it fucking wrong for a really long time until we acclimatize. We're so used to, and society, even on its own, has made huge strides in technology about communicating with each other and who we're able to access and who we're able to talk to. We're not even used to the internet yet. And so we're talking, there are people who have been alive since, like, we put a man on the moon to Twitter, right? Like, these are, like, swaths of time where we've just had huge jumps. Huge jumps in what technology is capable of and what humans are capable, and ethical and societal changes and questions on a world that used to be so small, which is now so large. And so, as much as we're having this conversation, this might be 100% not applicable right now in a different part of the world. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Or it might be more or less applicable in those different parts of the world. This conversation can't even be heard in specific parts of the world right now. Right? Because there's no point in asking a woman who they are or what they want. You fuck off forever. Nobody cares about what you have to say.
Oh, yeah, I was raised Muslim, so I know.
So there's, right?
Yeah.
So there's the huge swaths of the world that are just not in a position to even be at the point of having this conversation. And so some of the things we complain about, I think we forget that it's a privilege that we're at this point that we're even capable of having the conversation. And so looking at it in a more of a positive light and saying, hey, listen, we've got this far, let's see how far further we can go, is, I think, maybe a better, more positive spin on this generally negatively viewed topic.
I absolutely go there. Absolutely. I could not agree more. I mean, we've never had it so good, especially us, in our country, in our neck of the woods, in our Western hemisphere, we could say, Western nations, first world countries. And this
first
is
world
always
countries with fourth world internet, Canada, hell yeah.
I mean, it's always proven out for me when I sit down with somebody who's, bitching and moaning and complaining and go, okay, where would you like to go and at what time? What time period? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to live?
Yep.
It's always right here, right now, because this is the best we've ever had it, so so I definitely poo-poo the whole, oh, it's all so bad and destroy everything and all that. That totally different topic, but
I mean, you're the only one in the call, Chris, that would be even safe going backwards at all.
Yeah, I can only go back so far, and I don't even think I get to live in the same country if I go too far back, so
I can't go anywhere. I'd be a witch.
I just recognize how good we have it compared to the rest of the world, and the freedoms we have, and the fact that people are so quick to decry those freedoms because of some inequality issue they happen to be looking at from their little lens in the moment. And that, you just go, absolutely, inequalities exist, and they always will. We can move the ball forward down the road constructively, or we can burn it all down. I'd rather not burn it all down, because authoritarian dictatorships always follow in the wake of that, and nobody's benefited by that,
Yeah, there is something to be said that it doesn't make it immune from criticism, right? Saying, hey, we're at what it means is to say we're at a really good starting point, right? Clearly, people acknowledge there's a problem. Otherwise, Destiny wouldn't be having this conversation at all. And secondly, people obviously care about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't get clicks and views like it does. So,
and the fact we can even have the conversation, and that the conversation's being had and being seen, is more than anyone, even one generation back, could have ever dreamed of.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's not to say that, oh, just be happy with your lot in life and accept it. No. It's no. You're starting at a good spot to help things move forward. How do we take advantage of that?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. This has been a great conversation, though. I don't know. This is great. I feel like this was way more productive than the 11-hour stream where I was driven to drink.
I saw that time mark on that video. I was like, am I reading that right? How do you do? Like, wow. It was impressive.
I was so like mad. By the time I got offline, I went in the Discord and just bitched about how like unhappy I was with that stream because it felt so incredibly fucking unproductive.
I added to the unproductive. We cut to about 8 hours in. I hop in and I did not help. I'm supposed to be the professional, and I just got mad. And I'm like, no, that's not how that's not how English works. That's the one big thing that gets me is like in the conversations we had in the past, like, man, we're throwing out English. I don't know how to help you. You're lost in the sauce. And this is why I'd much rather have someone like you in because you're much more positive. I'm like, all right, it's already negative enough. We get like English. We just have to speak English first, or whatever language you speak. Just a common understanding of the basic language and how it works. Nothing. And then the attacks on
Women
Chesh
are in
and
fact
Manya for
not
simply
gunball machines.
yeah, and the attacks on Chesh and Manya for people just not wanting to listen to them because they're women automatically brought me in a combative like, oh my god, if I saw you on the street, I would like think about my mom, and my sisters. I'd be like, I'd probably fight you if we were on the street, like just because that mindset is so destructive to just how anything could work. Yeah, I'm not gonna listen to you because you're a different gender than me. What?
There's
What do you mean?
definitely something to be said too about this. The people who are terminally online, people who spend their time at work and then at home on the computer, and workplaces have been getting more and more like sterilized when it comes to sexual encounters, right?
Mm.
Which I think is probably good. Like you should not like they're
Inappropriate. It's inappropriate in a workplace. It doesn't belong there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So being able to communicate at work, great. But sterilizing and taking gender identity and taking LGBTQ stuff and sexual orientation and religious stuff all out of the workplace, pretty much a good idea. Because none of that matters. Get your job done, yes, no. Right?
It's just like, get the job done.
Right, exactly. Right. And so that's where you work, and then you go home and you go online, and this is where you spend all of your time, and this is all that you're hearing. You end up in this. You don't have any experience in the world. And so
no, and also there's actually an even more something I was just coming across the other day that I just thought was absolutely fascinating. Let me look it up here because no. Basically 1% of the people on social media are the ones creating the content. 9% of them are the ones commenting or engaging with it, and the other 90% are lurking or watching.
Yeah.
That's an important ratio to understand in terms of who you're actually hearing from and how much of a representative position in society that is. You're seeing a very, very minority of a minority point of view, and the engagement with that position is a minority of a minority view. And if you take that and think, oh, this is society at large, this is everybody, you will have a very, very skewed idea of how the world actually is. You know,
it comes back to when I was a teacher. I have a classroom with 24 kids, and one parent wants it some type of way, and I tell them we have 23 other kids than your own that I have to also create a curriculum for and work with. So why we want to change the entire classroom, and I'd hear from why I want to change the entire classroom for this one kid is not going to fly with me. So like I said, I used to get flagged for it all the time. I'm not doing it. My boss would bring me in her office. She's a very large woman. Since leaving that job, she's still like, she just gave me a headache all the time because you would just never, I go, think about this for a minute. How many of those kids still till this day, even though it's been like 3 years since I've worked there, 3-4 years, still, I used to drive for Amazon, drove up and dropped off a package and got a message on Facebook from one of my old families like, oh, Charlotte, seen you in the camera on the thing. And she started talking about it. I'm like, oh, okay, so you still remember even though I only had you for like a year. So those things matter and last. It's like we don't take the positive aspects of it last much longer than the negative, despite what people think. And so that's why I think that the biggest thing is we need to focus on, like Chesh said, the positive and moving forward, as opposed to just being stuck on what Chris said, the negative in this very vocal minority.
And there's something also to be said for how seriously your audience is actually taking you versus how many are actually just hate watching and lurking versus what are people going to take away from your content and is it and in what way will it affect their like their actual lives, and is it even going to affect their lives outside of whatever interaction, right? So like, is me watching Destiny talking about this situation and doing what we've done here and the interactions that I've had with Destiny's fans at this point going to affect my real life? Well, besides getting hungover and really sick and puking for half of a day, I don't think it's really going to do a whole lot. But you know what would be or what is valuable? Having a conversation in the pre-show with Chris about testosterone levels and the effect that that has. Because not only is that something that I knew but didn't take as seriously, but now is something that I can take forward and maybe apply differently. Right? And say, okay, well, if I'm at the bar and I'm seeing some dude behave in this way, that way, or the other thing, maybe I can be slightly more patient in my approach one way or another, or not approach, or maybe I'll just be like, oh, he's an idiot, I'm just gonna bonk him on the head. He's just not thinking right now. I'm just gonna give him like a nice slap across the face and he'll be like, oh, hey, yeah, wake up, hello, yeah, hi, good to know, hi, what's up, hello.
Yeah, exactly. Some guys, I tell you, some guys need the cold water dip, man. They need the reality, what we used to call a severe reality adjustment.
There was a video that I watched, and it was a clip of The View where they were talking to a lady who used to protest with the Black... Yeah, yes, exactly. She used to protest with the Black Panthers. And do you want to say her name again, just so I don't talk over you?
That's Jane Fonda.
Jane Fonda. And
yeah.
And she is talking about how in these extreme situations, you protest, you do what you can, and the ladies of The View were like, yeah, and what else can you really do beyond that? And Jane says, murder. And they just shut her the fuck down in the complete disrespect of the shit that people had to go through to be acknowledged as human beings and just trying to whitewash. And that's what I think is the internet tries to do a lot. The internet tries to tell you that having these kinds of difficult conversations and acknowledging that sometimes the way things work in the real world isn't like consequence-free, and sometimes those consequences are violent. Like, how far do you expect to be able to push a person before they retaliate?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, yeah, no, you shouldn't hit anybody. Yeah, no, you shouldn't be violent towards anybody. But realistically, if you're gonna sit there and you're gonna poke somebody in the eye continuously for years, how long is it gonna be before they break your fucking finger?
Yeah, probably not that long, actually.
Probably not that long.
I've watched it in kids. It takes all of about 10 seconds for some of my students to immediately start to go hit another one. It's like, well, I had a kid who got punched. He punched one other kid in the back, and the other kid who was very, very sweet kid, never, ever, ever once would hit another kid. And he came to me, he's like, Gabe keeps punching me in the back. And I went, you know, Gabe, when he hits you back, and he's probably going to punch you in the face because he's smart enough to do it, I'm not going to say anything to him. You've hit him in the back like 3 times. And just the fear that
retaliation
would retaliate against him, and I wouldn't do anything about it because I told him that's what you would deserve for hitting him, because that's how reality works. If your dad came up and hit me, I'd hit him back. He didn't do it anymore. Now, Cam didn't have to hit him, but he understood it and never did it again. That's just how it works sometimes.
Yeah,
he understood the concept. And guess what? Eventually, the kid did hit him, punched him right in the face, and I went, well, what'd you learn? You thought because you switched targets that meant anything? No, someone's gonna hit you if you hit them. Like, what did you think? Not everyone is as calm and cool and collective as some other people. You once again respecting personal boundaries. You never have to get to that point. Why do you have to get to that point for you to understand? But also, sometimes you got to go to that point because other people won't have that same qualm about not murdering. Like, yeah, sometimes you gotta. That shutdown was. I remember watching that. That was terrible. And she's like, yeah, no, sometimes you have to. Like, maybe this is a cultural thing, at least as far as this is. It's something that always gets told. My grandfather is from South Carolina. My great-grandmother, who is 97 in November, is like, yeah, well, if you look very carefully in South Carolina, it's like there's a lot of Black Panther uniforms that are in police lockers with bullet holes in them. I don't know how many Klan outfits that aren't somewhere in someone's closet. And so like that's a thing. It's just like they didn't get arrested or anything like that. They just kind of got ingratiated
Well, and
into
it's not reasonable for somebody who's for one group or side to be continuously violent towards the other side to then cry when somebody lashes out violently back towards them. And I'm concerned about what expectation Destiny is setting with his interpretation of this. Right? If his interpretation is that men are supposed to push forward, and women are supposed to get raped. Okay, so what happens? How far and how much are women supposed to accept and take on while being given zero resources or not being in a position of power at all to even do anything about it before women lash out in a way that is gonna probably end up being violent?
Even to the point of the last time you were in a chat with it was like, well, it wouldn't happen if you had a gun. It's like, well, is that what you want? Do you want women to just start blowing dudes away who just like, hey man, would you like to go out sometime?
Because of a misunderstanding?
Exactly. That's the short-sightedness of this that I find so mildly infuriating is that exact point. I'm really glad you brought that up, is that there are
I promise I can loop it back together. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very real point, and one that needs to be made, is that when you go out on a public platform, put yourself on a soapbox, and start saying stuff and attracting a crowd, you do have some responsibility for the thoughts and ideas that you are creating, and you don't have responsibility for the things those people do. That's on them. But you have to mind your words, and you have to understand that there are consequences to the words you use. And that's where I get a little frustrated with his messaging is, well, where does this go? Exactly as you're pointing out. It's the most important point.
I'm gonna get a Glock. Yeah. So whenever I go to the bar, I make sure I keep a loaded Glock in my back pocket, so that way when a drunk guy looks at me funny from across the room and I don't like the way he looked at me, I'm gonna shoot him in the dick because I'd rather not get raped. And that might be what he was gonna do. And it might be that he was trying to approach me and I didn't want that. I didn't want to take that risk, so I shot him in the dick.
Right. I mean, if you're asking what women can do more, that would be that. It's like carry a Bowie knife on you at all times because you just never and like you said, a Glock. And I always point to this and like I'm like, well, you go at it being combative, what do you expect people to do but combat you? Like if you're a different culture or a different race and you go to a different race's neighborhood and you're told all these negative things about them, well, you're going to think negative things. It's like, oh, what did you expect to happen? You were walking in the ghetto. Of course you got robbed. It's like, that's not how that works at all. You said there are good people and bad people. End of story. But if every person that shows up to any situation where it's like you have preconceived notions like that, you're going to get those negative reactions. And it's like, none of that is beneficial.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, and the last thing I want to do is get shot the one time I meet Chesh and just say hi to her. So,
pow, pow, pew, pew, pew. You came to the wrong neighborhood. Tip my hat.
Hey, Chesh, let's finally meet you. Like, oh, dude, you're too close.
Don't touch me.
Oh my God. Or we could think this through a little bit more and kind of circle back to what we started with was, well, maybe we could communicate a little bit more.
That sounds like way less fun.
I know. I'm such a killjoy here.
I appreciate it.
That's just wants her Mexican standoff. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and when you're talking to young men who are thinking more with, hormonal urges than their frontal lobes, then that's the kind of behavior you get, which is why it's even more important if you have an audience of that kind to be aware of that kind of thing and temper and bring the temperature down with some practical advice that actually works in the moment, not this bullshit about guys just can't control themselves. I really, really, really don't like that. It's the exact opposite of the truth. Yeah. And it just can't, since we're kind of responding to this guy here with this, that's my real big response to him is, dude, think the thought through. What are you saying?
And think about the audience you're reaching and how they're going to take that, regardless of it. Okay, you don't want to acknowledge the negative ones. I perfectly understand on any kind of platform. If you have any kind of audience, you don't want to feed, and being a teacher, I don't want to feed the kids acting negatively because then kids think that's how I get the attention is to act negatively, But also, like you said, you're not there. The problem is a lot of the guys, like you said, they look for the negativity. The gaslighting gets them more clicks. But you don't want to gaslight certain types of people. They don't know. You don't want to do it anyway. But especially if you know you have such a big audience and it's like anyone could take this however they want, that or use it like that, and you just go, I don't even think about them on who are using it for horrible justification for horrible things. You bear a lot of the responsibility in that. And in speaking to both of you, it's like you clearly understand that regardless of the size of your platform. I'm a very small creator, and it's like when I'm on a live stream and I have like a thought that crosses, I have verbal diarrhea all the time. I always go, make sure I mean this. Or even when I'm just like communicating with one of my friends, it's like, this is what I mean. Apologies if that sounded a little weird.
You're being
yes,
conscious.
thank you. Conscious communication.
I call this like third dimensional thinking, right? First dimensional thinking is you're just saying words. You're not actually really comprehending. And this is not a level of, not every interaction is ever going to be any one of these, right? You're not just a third dimensional thinker as an individual. It's just a way to measure like an interaction. So if I said, hey, what's your favorite type of jam, and you tell me strawberry, that's first dimensional thinking. You're not actually considering your what you're saying or why the person is asking or yada yada yada. You're just answering a basic question. Second dimensional thinking is when you go, oh, why are they asking me this question? Oh, Christmas is coming up. Oh, well, maybe they're asking me this because they want this, or the other thing. Third dimensional thinking is understanding that there's more than just you and the other person in the room having the conversation, right? Particularly if you're online, and particularly if you're in a room with multiple people. And then fourth dimensional thinking is when you put time into it. Well, we're sitting here recording this conversation. This video could be seen 2 years down the line. And so making sure that what you're saying and how you're saying it is airtight and consistent in itself, that you, where if you're first dimensional thinking, no, you're not. It'll be self-contradictory most of the time. If you're trying to make like a bigger argument, that's where you start getting into where you can actually start to have an effect and say things that are matter. It's being conscious about it. But we should start wrapping it up. Chris?
Yeah.
Who are you? What's going on?
Okay, so again, I am Chris Shelton. YouTuber, podcaster, blogger, author, writer, researcher, ex-cult member, and all-around great guy. Yeah. And you can find me on YouTube at my channel. And if you're really interested, by the way, and I will throw this out there, I have written a book about Scientology.
Yes.
So I'll plug the book.
Yes, plug the book. Give me the link to the book. I'll put the book in the description.
It's not my memoir. It's not my story. Oh. It's actually an analysis of Scientology. You can get all the whole breakdown on it. So I will plug that. It's called Scientology A to Xenu. And
that's a good title.
Yeah, I wish I could claim original ownership of that title. Somebody suggested it to me and said, run with it. And I said, absolutely. So if you're interested,
it feel any better, my show on Friday is that time of the month, and I didn't come up with that title either. It's a show of all women.
That makes sense. So there you go. That's who I am and what I do, and I hope you'll check out my channel.
I'll get a link to the channel. Link to the channel is down below, but I'll get Chris to send me a link to his book so I can add that to the description down below as well. Generic, who are you? What do you do?
I have not written a book. I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. I am a meat popsicle. No.
Cold?
Well, I mean, I was raised Muslim, so technically not too far off in certain respects. But no, I am a YouTuber, streamer, quote unquote, nerd. I talk and mostly play a lot of Pokemon. So you can find my YouTube channels, Generic Minority. Follow me on Twitch, Generic Minority YT. Bother me on Twitter because I have no problem having conversations with people. I'd love to be a guest on more things. So I'm always looking to have conversations with people, especially we can actually, a lot of the times I think stuff needs to get ironed out. And I'd like to act as like a level-headed everyman. And because I like to put myself in other people's perspective and reach them on their level. So if you like those things, follow me.
Hell yeah. Again, links down below. One message from Manya before we get on out of here. It's what the F was accidental rape? That really bamboozled me and hurt my brain. And the answer is, it falls along with the kind of like the non-violent rape, and it basically falls along the line of this one was worse. So if this one was worse, it means that this one couldn't be that thing. And it's like, that's not how that works. And the answer is that something being worse doesn't mean that the first one wasn't violent in the first place or accidental in the first place. It's a misnomer of the word accident. It's that word's doing a lot of heavy lifting that it has no right doing.
Yeah, that's
like humble opinion from the other day.
Oh God, no, don't, Chris. I'll tell you about this later. All right, we're gonna get on in here.
Right.
I'm gonna end on a joke. If you meet me and you want to have sex with me, we're gonna find out which is faster, your shot or mine, and we're gonna get on out of here. Bye.